Spirals of maple shavings collected on the floor around Elias Ward's scarred, dark hands. His carving knife moved through the wood with practiced, unwavering precision. Beyond his workshop window, a sleek black sedan shone like a panther in the morning haze of Millbrook. The man in the expensive suit held a large envelope to his chest, as if it were a shield, his body trembling. Elias's sharp, steel-gray eyes met the stranger's desperate gaze through the glass, and his knife paused mid-slice. A knot formed in his stomach. Was it recognition, or perhaps a flicker of fear? The visitor's polished shoes scuffed on the worn wooden porch as he drew nearer. "My daughter. She hasn't been able to move for half a year." The man's voice cracked through the doorway, thick with exhaustion and hopelessness. "The doctors have given up. I've liquidated assets, called in every favor, used every connection, and exhausted every last bit of hope." Elias placed his knife on the workbench and opened the door, recognizing the profound devastation in the father's bloodshot eyes. "Let me help her," he offered in a quiet tone. For 2 years, Elias had been hiding in this small Connecticut town, making a living by carving furniture and toys for children, hoping the simple, steady work could quiet the ghosts that plagued his nights. Millbrook was the type of town where secrets were easily buried under polite greetings and fallen leaves. He could hear his 8-year-old daughter Zoe humming through the thin walls as she prepared for school. Her voice was the single anchor to the new existence he had painstakingly built from the ruins of his former life. The crisp air smelled of burning wood from neighboring chimneys, mingling with the scent of wood glue that clung to his workshop like a second skin. He had chosen this town specifically because it was a place a man could vanish and reinvent himself completely. The man on his doorstep seemed to be hollowed out from the inside. Elias knew who Victor Hayes was, though they had never met. He stood tall, yet seemed shrunken, worn down by months of sleepless nights and fruitless medical consultations. His fine suit hung loosely on a frame that had likely shed 20 pounds since his daughter's accident, and his hands shook as he clutched the envelope like it was his final prayer. Behind him, the luxury car's engine ticked as it cooled, a stark contrast to the pickup trucks and older sedans common to this working-class area. Elias saw it clearly in the man's face, the unique desperation of someone with limitless resources who finds them utterly powerless against the one thing that truly matters. "You have the wrong man," Elias stated, but his voice lacked conviction. He was well aware of who Victor Hayes was, the CEO of Hartford Insurance, whose face was plastered on billboards across New England. More significantly, he knew about the accident that had filled local news 6 months prior, when a brilliant 16-year-old honor student's car had smashed into an oak tree on a rain-slicked road. The fact that Hayes was standing here meant that someone had broken his silence, someone who knew about the life he had abandoned, the skills he had buried along with his wife's medical debt and his own shattered spirit. Victor's voice gained strength, becoming more insistent, slicing through Elias's carefully constructed denial. "I know who you used to be. Dr. Elias Ward, the chief of neurosurgery at Yale New Haven. I know you worked miracles before you vanished." The words tumbled out of Victor in a torrent, as if he had practiced them endlessly during the long, dark nights. "My daughter, Amara, has been paralyzed from the waist down since the crash. Every expert in the country says her condition is hopeless. But I've heard whispers in the medical world about the techniques you were pioneering, about cases where you saved people from impossible odds." Elias's jaw clenched as a flood of memories washed over him. The glare of operating room lights, the precise ballet of a scalpel and sutures, the godlike power of holding a person's future in his steady hands, and then the nightmare that had destroyed it all. The rhythmic beeping of monitors abruptly flatlining, his wife's face losing color on the very table where he had promised to save her. Victor stepped closer, his desperation so thick it felt tangible in the morning air. "I've exhausted every option. Experimental treatments in Switzerland, stem cell therapies in Germany, acupuncture, meditation, even faith healers. I've spent over $3 million chasing a cure and nothing has changed. But Amara, her paralysis isn't just physical, she's surrendered. My vibrant, brilliant girl has stopped fighting, and I feel like I'm watching her fade away a little more each day. His voice broke on the final words, and Elias saw the raw agony of a father who had tried everything except this one last, desperate long shot. "Do you know what doctors can't do?" Elias asked, his voice barely audible. "They can't resurrect the dead. They can't erase the mistakes that torment you in your sleep, and they certainly can't promise miracles to heartbroken fathers who believe a former surgeon can fix what the world's best hospitals could not." Yet, even as he uttered these words, Elias found himself moving aside, allowing Victor Hayes to enter his workshop. The park was nearly deserted at noon, save for a few joggers and an older gentleman feeding ducks near the pond. Elias had arrived early, selecting a bench under a sprawling maple tree whose leaves drifted down like golden rain with each breeze. He had tried to work on a commissioned rocking horse that morning, but his hands had trembled so much he'd almost ruined the intricate mane he had been carving for weeks. When Victor Hayes appeared, crossing the lawn with his shoulders slumped beneath an unseen burden, Elias noted he had swapped his expensive suit for jeans and a simple wool coat. The change was stark. Stripped of the armor of his wealth, Victor looked like any other father clinging to a final, fragile hope. He sat next to Elias without asking, his hands shaking slightly as he took out his phone. "This was Amara 6 months ago," Victor said, displaying a photo of a beautiful teenager with intricate braids and intelligent, bright eyes standing proudly next to a science fair project. She had just won first place for her work on neural regeneration and spinal cord injuries, a full ride to Harvard. She wanted to study medicine, to change the world. She always said every problem has a solution if you're just smart enough to find it. His voice wavered as he swiped to the next image. The same girl, now in a hospital bed, unconscious and tethered to machines, her face pale and still in a way that suggested she might never stir. The crash was on Route 9 during a storm. A drunk driver blew through a red light, and Amara's car flipped 4 times before it hit the tree. She was in a coma for 3 weeks, and when she finally woke up, Victor's voice faded as he wrestled with the memory. The spinal cord damage was complete at the L1 vertebra, he continued, slipping into the clinical terminology he'd been forced to learn. Total paralysis below her waist. No feeling, no voluntary movement, no chance of recovery, according to every neurologist we've seen. But the physical damage isn't the worst of it. Amara used to fill every room with her energy. She would debate philosophy with her teachers and argue politics at dinner. Now, she won't talk to anyone. She won't eat unless I make her. She won't even look outside. It's like the accident didn't just break her back, it broke her spirit. Elias examined the photos, seeing not just Amara's face, but the faces of countless patients he had treated. Young people whose futures had been snatched away by random tragedies, whose families had pleaded with him for miracles he could not always provide. "What makes you think I can help when Harvard's top neurologists couldn't?" Elias asked, although something in Amara's eyes reminded him of another young woman who had faced down impossible odds with unyielding resolve. "Because you didn't just treat patients. You were revolutionizing our understanding of neural recovery," Victor answered, producing a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local Surgeon Develops Breakthrough Spinal Cord Treatment," accompanied by a photo of a much younger Elias accepting an award. "This article is from 5 years ago. It talks about your experimental work with neural pathway reconstruction, your theory that intensive fine motor training could encourage the brain to form new connections around damaged spinal tissue. The medical community called you a visionary before you disappeared." Elias's throat constricted as he read his own words quoted in the piece. promises about the future of spinal cord therapy that now seemed like prophecies from another man's life. "That was before my wife Elena died on my operating table," Elias said, handing the clipping back. "Before I learned that vision means nothing when you fail the one person who matters most. These hands that saved hundreds of lives couldn't save her. I haven't held a scalpel since the confession hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge neither was sure he wanted to cross." Victor remained silent for several minutes, absorbing what he had just been told. When he finally spoke, his words were measured, gentle, yet insistent. "Maybe that's precisely why you're the one who can help Amara. Not because you're infallible, but because you know what it's like to lose everything and have to find a reason to go on. Amara isn't just physically paralyzed. She's paralyzed emotionally, spiritually. She needs someone who understands what it's like to fall from the highest peak and still find a reason to get up in the morning." Against every instinct that screamed for him to run, Elias found himself nodding. "I'll meet her," he said at last. "But I need you to understand one thing. I can't promise any medical results. Whatever I do for Amara, it won't involve surgery or traditional medicine. Those days are over for me." Victor's relief was palpable. His shoulders sagged as if a tremendous weight had been lifted. "What will it be about then?" he asked. Elias looked down at his own hands, the instruments that had once performed miracles and caused his greatest sorrow, now calloused and stained from years of woodworking. "Something I've been learning slowly, one carving at a time," he said. "The art of healing without cutting, of rebuilding without destroying, of discovering beauty in what is broken." As they rose to leave, Elias knew he was stepping back into a world he had sworn he would never enter again. The Hayes Mansion was situated on 5 acres of perfectly manicured grounds in Millbrook's most affluent neighborhood, a Tudor-style monument to success that felt as cold and imposing as a tomb. Elias guided his old pickup truck into the circular driveway, feeling like an intruder in a world of marble fountains and professionally designed gardens. Through the large windows, he caught glimpses of expensive art and polished furniture, yet the house felt vacant, as if all the money in the world could not fill the void left by tragedy. A middle-aged black woman with a kind face answered the door. Miriam Blake introduced herself as the housekeeper, speaking with the gentle authority of someone who had been tending to this family through its deepest sorrows. Her eyes carried the same weariness Elias had seen in Victor's, the look of a person who had watched helplessly as a family unraveled. "Mr. Ward," Miriam said, her voice warm and clear, "I'm so glad you've come. The young miss. She needs someone who knows what it's like to lose everything." She guided him through hallways adorned with family photographs that chronicled happier days. Victor, with a beautiful, smiling woman, Elias presumed was Amara's mother. Vacation snapshots from sun-drenched locales, birthday celebrations with elaborate cakes and genuine joy. "Mrs. Hayes passed when Amara was 12, Miriam explained, noticing his gaze. "Cancer, like your wife. Mr. Victor, he tried to be both mother and father, but sometimes a father's love isn't enough to mend a broken heart." They paused at the base of a sweeping staircase, and Miriam glanced toward the second floor with a worried expression. "Amara, she hasn't come out of her room in 3 weeks. The physical therapists, the counselors, even her school friends, she turns them all away." Elias ascended the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a descent into someone else's pain. The house was immaculate but sterile, devoid of the warmth and lived-in comfort of a true home. At the top of the landing, Miriam gestured toward a closed door at the end of the hall. "She knows you're here," she whispered, "but she might not talk to you. Be patient with her, Mr. Ward. She isn't angry with the world. She's angry with herself for surviving when she feels she shouldn't have." Through the thin wood, Elias could hear the faint strains of classical music, something melancholic and beautiful that suited the atmosphere of the house. When he finally knocked, the music ceased, but no one invited him in. After a moment, he tried the handle and found it unlocked. Amara Hayes sat in a high-tech wheelchair by her bedroom window, gazing at the autumn scenery with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had witnessed too much pain for her 16 years. She didn't turn as Elias entered or acknowledge him in any way, but he saw the tension in her shoulders and the way her hands gripped the wheelchair's armrests as if holding on for dear life. The room itself was a study in contrasts. Expensive furniture and electronics were interspersed with medical apparatus. Posters of bands and movies hung next to get-well cards that had obviously never been read. On her nightstand was a framed photo of a younger Amara crossing a finish line at a track meet, her arms raised in triumph, her face alight with the pure joy of achievement. It was a heart-wrenching reminder of all that the accident had stolen. "You can go now," Amara said without turning, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I don't need another person telling me how sorry they are, or that I need to stay positive, or that everything happens for a reason. My father has paraded a line of specialists, therapists, and miracle workers through here, and not one of them can change the fact that I'll never walk again." Elias didn't move or speak. He just stood quietly in the doorway, observing this broken young woman who reminded him so much of himself in the months following Elena's death. The same empty eyes, the same defensive anger, the same desperate need to push away anyone who might offer a glimmer of hope, only to have it extinguished. He could see the intelligence burning beneath her despair, a fierce mind now focused entirely on its own destruction. "You're right," Elias said simply, stepping into the room and closing the door. "I'm not here to fix you, or cure you, or fill your head with false hope about walking. And you're absolutely correct. Terrible things just happen to good people sometimes, and there's no inherent meaning in it, other than the meaning we decide to make afterward." Amara's eyebrows rose slightly, clearly taken aback by this response. "Then why are you here?" she asked, a fraction of the hardness leaving her voice. Elias scanned the room, noting the medical equipment, the unused art supplies collecting dust, the guitar leaning against a wall with its strings slack. "Because I think you and I might be lost in the same way," he said. "And sometimes it helps to have company when you're trying to find your way back." For the first time since he had arrived, Amara's mask cracked, revealing a flicker of curiosity beneath the anger. "Back to what?" she asked. "I don't know yet," Elias admitted, "but I'd like to find out." Over the next hour, they sat in her room and talked about everything except the accident and her paralysis. Elias told her about Zoe, about the simple joy of watching his daughter experience the world through 8-year-old eyes. Amara spoke about the books she was reading, complex novels on philosophy and human nature that would challenge most adults. Slowly, the wall she had constructed around herself began to crumble, offering glimpses of the brilliant, passionate girl she had been before tragedy redefined her world. "I used to paint," she confessed, her eyes drifting toward the art supplies on her shelf. "I loved how colors could merge to create something new. But my hands shake now because of the medication. Besides, what could I possibly create that would matter?" "What if I told you I might know a different way to work with your hands?" Elias asked carefully. "Something that doesn't demand perfect control or steady technique?" Amara turned back to him, her expression a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Like what?" Elias took out his phone and showed her a picture of one of his recent carvings, a small bird with intricate feather details that seemed to convey movement even in its stillness. Wood carving. It's forgiving, patient. It responds more to feeling than to precision. The wood itself tells you what it wants to be. All you have to do is listen. Amara studied the photo for a long moment, and Elias could see her analytical mind turning, weighing possibilities she hadn't considered before. "Why would you want to teach me?" she asked. "Because," Elias said, putting his phone away, "I think we both need to remember what it feels like to create something beautiful again." As Elias got ready to leave, Amara called to him from her wheelchair. "If I agree to let you teach me, I have conditions. You don't treat me like I'm broken. You don't give me any inspirational speeches. And if I tell you to leave, you leave." Elias considered her terms, recognizing the fierce independence that still burned inside her. "Deal," he said. "When do we start?" Elias arrived at the Hayes residence the next morning with a worn leather tool bag and a small block of basswood. Miriam Blake led him upstairs to Amara's room, where she waited with a look of mingled anticipation and doubt. "Change of plans," Elias announced. "We're not working in here. Get a jacket. We're going outside." Amara's eyes widened in surprise. "I don't go outside anymore," she said quickly, the old defensive walls beginning to rise. "Too many variables. Too many people staring." Elias set his bag down and pulled a chair up to face her. "Amara, I can teach you to carve in this sterile room, surrounded by medical equipment. Or I can teach you where this craft is meant to be learned, under an open sky, with the scent of autumn in the air and the sounds of real life around us." After several long moments of internal debate, Amara took a deep breath and nodded. "Fine. But if this turns into some kind of feel-good, inspirational moment, I'm going straight back inside." The Hayes' back garden was a masterpiece of landscape architecture, with stone paths meandering through meticulously arranged flower beds and mature trees that formed natural privacy screens. Elias selected a spot near a small pond where a wooden bench sat beneath an old oak, its branches forming a canopy of gold and crimson leaves that filtered the morning sun into shifting patterns. He positioned Amara's wheelchair beside the bench so she could rest her arms comfortably. "First lesson," he said, handing her the block of basswood, "is about listening. Every piece of wood holds a story, where it grew, the weather it survived, how it lived. Before you make a single cut, you have to understand what you're working with." He placed the wood in her hands, guiding her fingers over the grain. "Feel that? The way the fibers run in these long, straight lines. That's the wood's natural structure. If you work with it instead of against it, it will reward you." Amara's hands moved tentatively across the wood's surface, her analytical mind cataloging textures and patterns most would ignore. "It's warmer than I expected," she commented, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "And it has this subtle smell, like growing things. Like life." Elias nodded in approval. "That's exactly right. Wood never truly dies. It just changes form. Every time you carve it, you're part of that transformation, helping it become something new." He took out a small carving knife with a wooden handle worn smooth from years of use. "This was my grandfather's knife," he explained. "It taught me that a tool is just an extension of your hand, your intention, and your respect for the material. The magic isn't in the blade. It's in the connection between you and what you're creating." For the first hour, Elias didn't let Amara make a single cut, instead having her practice holding the knife and understanding how different grips affected her control. When she finally made her first slice, the knife slipped, taking off more wood than she'd intended. She swore under her breath, her face flushing with frustration. "I told you my hands shake," she said, starting to put the knife down. "This was a stupid idea." Elias gently stopped her. "Look at what you just did," he said, pointing to the accidental gouge. "See how that alters the character of the piece? What if that wasn't a mistake, but the start of something unexpected?" Amara examined the irregular cut, her artistic eye starting to see possibilities rather than flaws. "I could work with it," she said slowly. "Make it part of the design instead of trying to hide it." Elias smiled. "Now you're thinking like a carver." Some of the most beautiful things I've ever made came from adapting to unforeseen challenges. As the morning wore on, Amara began to relax into the rhythm of the work, her movements growing more assured with each small victory. In the following weeks, Elias and Amara settled into a comfortable routine. Every weekday at 10, he would arrive with his tools and a piece of wood they had chosen for the day's project. Amara's skills improved quickly, her innate artistic talent combining with a fierce determination to create increasingly complex pieces. She carved a small bird, then a flower, then a miniature tree with textured bark and delicate leaves. Each creation pushed her abilities, and Elias watched with growing wonder as her confidence returned alongside her technical skill. More importantly, he saw changes that had nothing to do with carving. Amara had started reading again, was video calling with friends, and had even mentioned an interest in continuing her education. The girl who had been silent for months was slowly reawakening. But it was during their third week together that Amara first noticed something strange about Elias's methods. They were working on a difficult piece when her knife slipped, nearly cutting her finger. Elias's reaction was immediate and revealing. He caught her hand in his, examined the near miss with clinical precision, checked her pulse and pupil response, and asked detailed questions about any numbness or tingling she might feel. It was the behavior of someone with deep medical training, not a simple artisan. "You did that like a doctor," Amara said, studying his face. "Actually, you've been doing a lot of things like a doctor. The way you watch my hands, the questions about my physical therapy, even how you position my wheelchair for optimal ergonomics." Elias's stomach clenched as he realized his carefully constructed facade was starting to crack. "I told you I used to study medicine," he said cautiously, but Amara's sharp mind was already connecting dots he had hoped would stay separate. "Studying medicine isn't the same as being a doctor," she countered. "And you have the hands of a surgeon. Steady, precise, completely confident, even when teaching a different skill." She set down her knife and wheeled closer, her green eyes sharp with curiosity. "My father has been acting strange too, like he's hiding something." "What kind of doctor were you?" she asked directly. "And why are you pretending to be someone else?" Elias felt the walls of his new life begin to crumble, realizing that Amara's intelligence made her far more dangerous to his secret than he had ever imagined. The truth was about to surface, and when it did, everything between them would change. Elias stared at the half-finished horse in his hands, its wooden eyes seeming to judge him for the lie he had been living. "I was a neurosurgeon," he admitted at last. "I specialized in spinal cord injuries and brain trauma. I developed some experimental techniques for neural pathway reconstruction. Published papers that caused a stir in the medical community." Amara's face shifted through a spectrum of emotions: surprise, anger, understanding, and finally a cold fury that made her look much older than 16. "So this whole thing, the wood carving, the friendship, all of it, you've been studying me like a lab rat?" Her voice was dangerously quiet. "Were you planning to write a paper on using art therapy for paralyzed teenagers? Is that what this is about?" Elias could see the walls rising around her again, higher and stronger than before. He knew he was about to lose not just her trust, but any chance of helping her heal. "No," Elias said firmly. "The carving is real, Amara. My caring about you is real. I'm not studying you or planning to publish anything about our work." He set down his tools and faced her, knowing that only absolute honesty could salvage their connection. "I stopped practicing medicine 3 years ago after my wife died during a surgery I was performing on her. I couldn't save the person who mattered most to me, and I lost faith in my ability to help anyone. I came to Millbrook to disappear, to live quietly and try to forget who I used to be. Amara listened with the same intense focus she applied to her carving, weighing his words for truth. Your father found me because he'd heard rumors about my research. He was desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. But I didn't agree to help you because of your medical chart. I agreed because I saw something in your eyes that I'd seen in my own reflection every morning. What? Amara asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. The look of someone who once believed they could change the world, but lost that belief when the world changed them instead, Elias replied. I saw a potential in you that had nothing to do with whether you would ever walk again, and everything to do with whether you would find reasons to keep creating, keep growing, and keep becoming the person you were meant to be. Amara was silent for a long time, studying the wooden horse as if it held the answers. If you're really a neurosurgeon, why haven't you tried to examine me or offer medical opinions about my prognosis? She finally asked. Because I'm not your doctor, Elias said. I'm your friend. And friends don't see disabilities, they see possibilities. For the first time since learning his secret, Amara's expression softened. So the carving really isn't medical therapy disguised as art? She asked. It's just carving. Elias nodded. Just carving that happens to be good for the soul. Their conversation was cut short by the sound of an unfamiliar voice drifting from the garden. It was authoritative and professional, with the crisp diction of someone used to being obeyed. Dr. Ward, the voice called out. I'm Dr. Leonard Cross from Johns Hopkins. I need to speak with you about your research. Elias felt his blood run cold. Cross was one of the most respected neurologists in the country, and more importantly, someone who could expose everything he had tried to escape. Stay here, Elias told Amara, but she was already maneuvering her wheelchair toward the house. Like hell, she retorted. If this involves you in medicine, it involves me too. As they approached the house, Elias saw a tall, silver-haired black man in an expensive coat speaking intently with Victor Hayes on the front porch. He knew, in that moment, that his carefully constructed new life was about to shatter. Dr. Cross was everything Elias remembered, imposing, brilliant, and utterly certain of his own righteousness. He turned as they approached, his eyes taking in the wheelchair, the carving tools, and the obvious bond between them. Elias, he said, with a smile that never reached his eyes. You're looking well for a man who's supposed to be having a nervous breakdown in seclusion. Victor Hayes stood beside him, looking deeply uncomfortable, clearly uncertain of how much he should disclose. Dr. Cross contacted me through mutual acquaintances, Victor explained. He's representing a consortium of institutions that are very interested in your past work. Cross stepped forward, his gaze shifting from Elias to Amara with a clinical eye. More specifically, we're interested in your current work. Word travels fast in our world, Elias. A paralyzed patient making remarkable progress under the care of a disgraced neurosurgeon? That's the kind of story that gets attention. He pulled out a tablet and displayed brain scans that made Amara gasp. These are images of your brain activity, Miss Hayes, from your most recent MRI. Notice the increased activity in the motor cortex, in the areas corresponding to hand and finger movement. That's not a coincidence. That's systematic neural reconstruction happening in real time. Amara stared at the colorful images, seeing proof that something profound was changing inside her, that the carving wasn't just therapy but a medical intervention she hadn't consented to. You used me, she said to Elias, her voice a faint whisper. This whole time, you were experimenting on me without telling me. Elias reached for her, but she jerked her wheelchair back, away from his touch. Amara, that's not... he started, but she cut him off with a look of pure betrayal. Don't you dare lie to me again. You're a neurosurgeon specializing in spinal cord injuries, and you just happen to decide to teach wood carving to a paralyzed teenager? Dr. Cross stepped between them, clearly savoring the drama he had created. The odds of that are zero, Miss Hayes, because it wasn't a coincidence. Your father sought out Dr. Ward because of his research, and Dr. Ward agreed because he saw a chance to test his theories without the messy oversight of hospitals and ethics committees. Victor Hayes looked horrified as he realized how his desperate act had been twisted into something ugly. That's not why I contacted him, he protested, but Cross was unrelenting. The methodology was brilliant, really. Use art therapy as a cover for intensive neural retraining. Avoid the legal risks of experimental surgery, and if it worked, you'd have proof of concept that could revolutionize spinal cord treatment. Amara's hands clenched as the full scope of the deception washed over her, and Elias watched helplessly as the light he had worked so hard to rekindle died in her eyes. As Dr. Cross's car drove away, Elias felt the weight of inevitability settle over him. Victor Hayes placed a hand on his shoulder as they watched the sedan disappear down the tree-lined drive. "I'm so sorry," Victor said. "I never intended for any of this to happen. Amara has been getting better, stronger, more confident, more like herself. But now she feels betrayed by the people she trusted most," Michael replied grimly, knowing the damage to her faith would be harder to repair than any physical wound. "She has every right to feel that way. I should have told her the truth from the start. I should have explained what I hoped the carving could achieve." Inside, they could hear Zoe's voice trying to comfort Amara, the 8-year-old's innocent attempts to make sense of the adult world's complexities. 3 days passed before Amara would see Elias again. When she finally consented to a meeting, it was on her terms, in a hospital conference room, with her neurologist, Dr. Kwame Adu, present as a witness. Amara sat in her wheelchair at the head of the polished table, looking far older than her 16 years, while Elias took a seat opposite her. "I want to know exactly what's been happening to me," she said, her voice steady despite the emotional storm raging inside her. "I want to know about your research, what you thought the carving would accomplish, and what those brain scans really mean. But most of all, I want to know if any of our friendship was real, or if I was just your latest research project." Dr. Adu looked between them, clearly uneasy with the tension, but understanding the need for this confrontation. Elias took a deep breath and began to explain his research in detail: the neural pathway reconstruction theory, the experimental surgeries, the promising early trials before Elena's death ended his career. "The basic premise," he said, falling into the precise language of a medical professional, "is that the brain has more plasticity than we once understood. When spinal cord tissue is damaged, the neural pathways are disrupted. My research suggested that intensive fine motor control exercises could help the brain forge new connections around the damaged area." Amara listened intently, her analytical mind processing the science even as her emotions reeled. "So the carving was designed to stimulate specific brain regions?" she asked. "The fine motor control, the visual spatial processing, the hand-eye coordination, all of it was calculated to promote neural growth." Elias nodded reluctantly. That was the theory. "But Amara, even if the carving was helping your brain, that doesn't diminish what you accomplished." "How do I know what's real?" Amara asked, her voice thick with pain. "How do I know which feelings and accomplishments are genuine, and which are just the result of medical intervention?" Elias paused, considering her profound question. "Look at what you've created," he said finally, gesturing to a small carved bird she had brought to the meeting, a recent piece that showed remarkable artistry. Medical intervention might have helped your hands become steadier, but it couldn't create the vision that guided those hands, the aesthetic sense that chose each cut, the emotional intelligence that breathed life into that wood, that came from you, from the part of you that existed long before the accident and will exist whether you ever walk again or not. Dr. Adu nodded in approval, clearly impressed by both Elias's medical knowledge and his sensitivity. 2 weeks later, an unexpected development changed everything. Amara was working in the garden on a warm spring morning when she felt a strange tingling in her left leg. At first, she dismissed it as a phantom sensation, but it persisted and grew stronger. She called for Miriam, trying to keep her voice calm. "It's probably nothing," she said, though her heart pounded with a mix of hope and fear. "But could you ask my father to call Dr. Adu? I think I need to get this checked." Within an hour, Amara was at Hartford Hospital, undergoing tests to determine if the impossible was happening. The results were unprecedented. MRI scans showed significant changes around her spinal cord injury, not a healing of the original damage, but evidence of new neural pathways that hadn't existed 6 months before. Dr. Adu called in colleagues to review the images. "I've never seen anything like this," he told Amara and Victor. "There's clear evidence of neural regeneration occurring at a rate that challenges everything we thought we knew. The tingling wasn't a phantom pain. It was your nervous system making its first attempt to reestablish communication." Elias received the call from Victor while teaching a woodworking class at the community center. His hands shook as he listened to the test results, and he had to sit down to process the news. "She's not walking yet," Victor said carefully, "but there's definitive proof that neural regeneration is happening. The doctors think it might be connected to the intensive fine motor training from the carving." Elias felt a wave of vindication and terror. His theories might actually work, but this development meant the medical community would descend upon Amara, and her privacy would be shattered. The response was swift and overwhelming. Researchers from major institutions contacted the family, requesting to study her case. But Amara, now wise to the dangers of medical exploitation, approached these offers with caution. "I'm willing to participate in legitimate research that could help others," she told a group of medical professionals at a hospital meeting. "But any study involving me will include patient advocacy oversight, complete transparency, and my right to withdraw at any time. I will not be anyone's lab rat again." Her conditions were met with surprised respect. Dr. Cross attempted to insert himself into the situation, but he was quickly shut down by hospital administrators aware of his ethical violations. More importantly, Amara's story sparked changes. Hartford Hospital implemented new protocols, requiring explicit patient consent for any research use of medical data, and other institutions followed suit. The girl who had been a victim of unauthorized surveillance had become a catalyst for systemic change, transforming from patient to advocate. Elias found himself both vindicated and cautioned. Medical ethics boards acknowledged his technique's therapeutic value, but emphasized that his failure to obtain informed consent was a serious violation. The resolution was a carefully crafted agreement, allowing him to continue his research within academic settings, subject to rigorous oversight. "You've discovered something potentially revolutionary," the head of the ethics board told him. "But a revolution in medicine must be balanced with respect for the people we're trying to help." Elias gratefully accepted the terms, knowing he had been given a second chance. Amara's physical recovery progressed slowly but steadily. The tingling gave way to improved muscle tone, reflexive responses, and eventually, limited voluntary movement in her left foot. She worked with physical therapists who marveled at her unusual recovery pattern, but Amara approached her progress with measured realism. "I'm grateful for every improvement," she told a reporter, "but I've learned not to define my worth by my physical capabilities. Whether I walk again or not, I'm still the same person who can create beautiful things and contribute to the world." The relationship between Amara and Elias evolved into a deep, complex partnership. They continued their carving projects, now with formal research documentation and consultations with medical professionals. Elias had learned to balance his desire to help with respect for her autonomy. "I think of Elias as a partner in my recovery now," Amara explained in a television interview. "He shares his knowledge, but he never assumes what I want or need. That's the difference between healing and manipulation." Zoe continued to visit regularly, bringing friends who were fascinated by Amara's carving and inspired by her story. The Hayes house, once a silent monument to grief, gradually filled with young voices and creative energy as Amara began teaching carving classes to neighborhood children. Miriam watched these gatherings with maternal pride. "Señorita Amara has learned the most important lesson," she observed to Elias. "She has learned that healing is something you do with people, not something that happens to you." The house that had once felt like a mausoleum was now alive with laughter. 1 year after her story went public, Amara received an invitation to deliver the keynote address at Harvard Medical School's annual Ethics Symposium. Standing before an auditorium of medical professionals, she spoke with quiet authority. "Medicine at its best is a collaboration between doctor and patient," she said, her voice carrying to the back of the room. "It requires trust, transparency, and mutual respect. When any of those are missing, even the most well-intentioned treatment becomes a form of violation." Her speech received a standing ovation and sparked ongoing discussions about reforming medical education. Elias attended the speech, sitting in the back and watching with pride. Afterward, as they walked across Harvard Yard together, Amara using forearm crutches that allowed her to walk short distances, they reflected on their journey. "Do you ever regret any of it?" Elias asked. "The deception, the publicity, the complications?" Amara was quiet for a moment. "I regret the deception," she said finally, "but I don't regret the outcome. Everything that happened led to changes that will help other patients. Sometimes good things come from bad beginnings, as long as people are willing to learn from their mistakes." Standing together in the courtyard where future doctors would train, they both understood their story had become larger than themselves. It was now a case study in medical ethics, a catalyst for policy change, and a reminder that healing requires both science and compassion. Zoe, now 9, had perhaps understood it best all along. Sometimes broken things can be made more beautiful than they were before, but only if people are honest about what's broken and work together to fix it. The wooden bird Amara had carved during her first week of lessons still sat on Elias's workshop shelf, its wings spread in permanent flight, a testament to the fact that even the most complicated stories can have endings that honor both truth and grace.